This week we learning Parsha Eikev. The translation of the word Eikev is because. First, as usual, the content of the Parsha. In this Parsha Eikev, Moses continues his closing address to the children of Israel, promising them that if they will fulfill the commandments, the mitzvot of the Torah, they will prosper in the land that they are about to conquer and settle in keeping with God's promise to their forefathers. Moses also rebukes them, basically not for their failings, but for failings of their parents in their first generation as a people, recalling their worship of the golden calf, the rebellion of Korah, and the sins of the spies, and more. You have been rebellious against God, he says to them, since the day I knew you. But he also speaks of God's forgiveness for their sins and the set of second tablets which God inscribed and gave them following their repentance after the golden calf. There are 40 years in the desert, says Moshe to the people, during which God sustained them with daily manna from heaven, which was to teach them that man does not live by bread alone, by physical bread alone, but by the utterance of God's mouth does the man live, he says. That means that the food we eat actually has a physical and spiritual aspect to it. And that the spiritual aspect of food is what actually keeps us alive, not the physical part of it, which we excrete as a matter of fact. Moses describes the land that they are about to enter as flowing with milk and honey, blessed with 7 kinds of plants: wheat, barley, grapevines, figs, pomegranates, olives for olive oil, and dates. And as the place that is the focus of God's providence, God's attention, of his world which God has created, he commands them to destroy the idols of the land's former owners, former masters, and to beware of the environment when they become haughty or prideful and begin to believe that by power of their own intellect and their own hands, they got this wealth which they will acquire. A key passage in our Parsha is the 2nd chapter of the Shema, which repeats the fundamental mitzvot enumerated in Shema's 1st chapter and describes the rewards of the fulfilling God's commandments and the adverse results, of course, famine, exile, and etc., if the commandments are neglected. It is also the source of definition of prayer and includes a reference to the resurrection of the dead in Messianic age. And that's the whole content of the Parsha. I must admit, when I was reading it and preparing for this blog, I couldn't escape it that Moshe is actually talking to us. I couldn't escape that thought. And I will try to explain. I will start with the words from Torah, translation of Moshe's statement in this Parsha. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increases, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And then he continues, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced the wealth for me. If you ever forget the Lord your God, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. And this, I just quoted the words of the Torah. What Moses is saying to the new generation, and it's absolutely relevant to us, to this pre-Messianic age generation, was this. You thought that the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness were the real challenge? And that once you conquer and settle the land, your problems will be over? No. The truth is that it is then that the real challenge will begin. It will be precisely when all your physical needs are met. When you have land and sovereignty and rich harvests and safe homes, that your spiritual trial will actually commence. The real challenge is not poverty, but affluence. Not insecurity, but security. Not slavery, but freedom. Moses, for the first time in history, was hinting at the law of history, which civilizations rise, become wealthy, happy, enjoying life, and fall. It's an ongoing process. And here Moshe first time alludes to the fact that we, humanity, must overcome this issue. And I will explain. Rabbi Sachs, in his latest book, Morality, or the other title, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times, says the following. In 1830, Alexis de Tocqueville, published a book, Democracy in America. In book first time, we find a new word, individualism. He defines individualism as different aspect comparing to egoism. He says egoism is a passionate and exaggerated love of self. Individualism is less a failing of character than an environment, a feeling which disposes each citizen to isolate himself from the mass of fellow citizens. People would leave everything that did not concern them personally, e.g., outside of their cycle of friends and relatives, to the state, and this would eventually lead to the end of democratic freedom. He explains further. The only thing that protected America and Europe from this outcome was the strength of its families, communities, churches, and charitable organizations. In other words, its moral environments where people actively cared for one another and learned to establish their sets of moral and ethical standards of behavior. In addition to that, we all know well how, due to theory of market economy, taking care of the world, all governments over the last 30, 40, 50 years, governments, the states, basically abdicated their social responsibility for their own population by allowing the market, commercial enterprises, freely choose where they manufacture their goods, where they establish their companies, etc. By doing that, they deprived their own citizens, who actually elected them, of the right to work and to earn a living, as well as transferred the know-how to other so-called developing countries. These two aspects of ever-growing expectations of people that the government will take care of their basic needs, and the same government abdicating their social responsibilities to the market forces, while importance of moral environments like families, communities, churches, and charitable organizations diminishing in 21st century brought our civilization to the calamities we experience today. That is the beginning of the end of any civilization. In an earlier chapter, Moses uses the graphic word "venanshantem." You will grow old. Deuteronomy 4:25, you can find it there. Meaning that you will no longer have the moral and mental energy to make the sacrifices necessary for defense of your freedom. And now the pandemic brought all of these issues to the surface. Politicians realized suddenly that allowing critical medical defense, power supply, and many other strategic items to be manufactured overseas makes their country and their population more vulnerable to the whims and political desires of the foreign governments, sometimes not very friendly. Allowing inequalities, exploitation, and inequalities in distribution of wealth will eventually result in riots, demonstrations, shaking the foundations of the states and governments. And we experienced that already too. Now we can try to understand what the book of Devarim is proposing. The creation of a society capable of defeating the normal laws of growth and decline of civilizations. This is an astonishing idea. Markets were made to serve us, Rebbe Sachs says, in the same book, Morality. We were not made to serve markets. Economics needs ethics. Markets do not survive by market forces alone. They depend on respect of the people affected by our decisions. Lose that, and we will lose not just money and jobs, but something much more significant still: freedom, trust, and decency, the things that have a value far above everything else. Only faith with strong moral foundations, based on families, communities, places of worship, supported by strong communities and charitable organizations, can save a society from decline and fall. Because that is what Torah law is saying to us: follow the Torah law. That was one of Moses' greatest insights, and it has never ceased to be true. Shabbat Shalom.